with money from the Volkswagen settlement money, and we have about 15% of the overall funding that's going to be allocated for this particular program. For those of you who haven't seen the actual application, you can go on to the Agency of Commerce and Community Development's website, and you can click on the Community Development, and then go down to Funding and Incentives, and you'll find the tab for electric vehicle supply equipment, and then you can click into the grant guidelines there. This has been an interagency partnership between the Department of Housing and Community Development, Department of Environmental Conservation, Agency of Transportation, Public Service Department, and Department of Health. And we'll continue to work collaboratively with those 5 agencies as we review grants coming in. So we have, as I mentioned, about 15% of the money, $2.4 million that we can allocate over the next 10 years. This one particular round that we have right now has about $400,000 that we can allocate in the November 30th deadline round. We have a cap for individual projects on $150,000. We are allowing multiple site applications. One thing to note there that we can't really mix public and privately owned sites together. They need to be in separate applications. And I can kind of go over that in a little bit more detail if you all have questions. 50% of the money is capped for any particular county. 40% of the total funding is capped for fast charge. And this is a reimbursement grant program, so projects must spend out the money and be completed prior to reimbursement, and completed within 2 years. So I want to talk a little bit about what's eligible and what's not eligible. Eligible activities are for level 2 and DC fast charge equipment. We can pay for permitting and design, power connections, striping and signage, warranty, internet connections, protective devices, and eligible installation costs. Would also include software that you might need for networking capabilities. So the matches are set based on whether or not they are government-owned, non-government-owned, or whether restricted access or public access. So in the case of publicly owned, publicly accessible, there would be a 10% match. If it's privately, which would be workplace charging or home charging, then that would be a 40% match. It is allowable to have in-kind or cash contributions, and if you exceed what we're asking for in the match requirements, then you'll get some additional points based on how much additional match that you're putting in. Eligible locations. I want to cover this and talk about generally what areas are going to be eligible, and then there's kind of categories within that. State-designated smart growth centers, highway corridors within 1 mile of I-89, 91, 93, and routes 2, 4, 7, 9, and 100. Public park and rides and transit hubs, major attractions, institutions, workplaces, and qualified multi-unit housing developments. And I'm going to kind of touch on each of these on separate slides. So within the state growth, the state designated smart growth centers, we have designated downtowns, village centers, new town centers, neighborhood development areas, growth centers. And then as you can see around the village centers and downtowns, we have an additional half-mile or quarter-mile neighborhood planning area that would be eligible as well. And this is for level 2 and DC fast charge equipment. On the Agency of Commerce and Community Development's website, there is a planning atlas that you can go into. And among other things, you can take a look at where the designated areas are, so you can determine whether or not your community has a designation or not, and what areas might be included. You can see the designation in the colored area, and then you can see kind of the radius around neighborhood planning area in the blue. And then you can see some park and ride that's indicated, as well as off an exit, a mile radius off an exit. So those are all eligible areas. Highway corridors, located within 1 mile of I-89, 91, or I-93. Also located within 1 mile of U.S. routes 2, 4, 7, 9, or 100. And once again, this is for publicly accessible stations, not for restricted access. And preferably, there is some kind of travel conveniences available, food, beverage, and restrooms preferred. Municipal or state park and rides, airports, transit hubs, passenger rail stations are all eligible. And you can see within the application, we have kind of these friendly links that you can see where are the park and rides, municipal and state park and rides. And if you have one that isn't listed here, then you can contact VTrans and get it added. Once again, there's a link to state airports. And then there's major attractions and institutions. And what we're defining as a major attraction or institution is whether or not they're a member of the Vermont Attractions Association, which is open year-round, a ski resort member of the Vermont Ski Area Association, open year-round. We have colleges and universities that are eligible, hospitals, and this is for publicly accessible level 2 and fast charge equipment. And once again, if you click on the links, you'll see you can go to Vermont Attractions and find out what are those, what are those eligible entities. Same thing with the ski resorts, colleges and universities, hospitals. You can click onto the hospital directory to see which ones are eligible. They're all eligible, but if you were wondering where they are. Multi-unit housing is another category. This is for new or existing multi-unit housing, and we're defining multi-unit in this particular case as 10 or more units. And this is really for level 2 charging equipment, since home charging doesn't really need to have fast charge stations. Workplaces, new or existing workplaces that have, or upon project completion, have at least 5 full-time employees on the site. Now I want to get into the competitive criteria. We have what we call the base criteria, which is 60 points of the overall 100 points. And that would be, this is an area of the application where you're going to want to pay a lot of attention and really kind of detail out what project, what your project is, where it is, why this is a great location, identifying the need, identifying that you've thought through the project thoroughly so that you can score good there in terms of its project readiness. You do have 2 years to install, but we do want to see that you walk through the process and talk to folks so you know what you're installing and where, and you've checked all your boxes. We want to see that the budget has been thought about, that you're approaching it with the most cost-effective approach, and then just the overall quality of application, how it was put together. And so that's going to be a really important piece of the application to pay close attention to, as well as the priority consideration, which I'm going to go into right now. And if you don't meet the minimum score of 60 points, then you're not, the project will not get funded. So when looking at priority consideration, as I mentioned in the beginning, you'll choose one of these categories that best fits the project that you're going to be, where you're going to be locating the charging station. But then you may be in multiple categories. You may be in a designated center as kind of your original checkbox, but now you might say, well, we're also, it's also a public park and ride, or perhaps it's a major attraction. So you can check those boxes and get additional priority consideration points. For all the categories, we're also considering these, future-proofing. driver charging discounts? Is there existing high demand that you can where the station's constantly being used, and you can document that there's a high use, high demand? Are you looking at multiple sites in one application? Certainly makes sense. I can see in the case of municipalities that are looking at multiple locations, it does make a lot of sense to kind of bundle it and do the work all at once, perhaps. And then what's the community impact? As far as the ones that are non-restricted, the publicly accessible EVSE, are they in high-profile locations? Are they filling a geographic gap within where there's no other charging station within 30 miles? We require that there be at least 2 ports and 2 parking spaces, but are you going to add additional multi-port and put 4 ports or 4 parking spaces? Housing and workplace specifically, identifying need for folks who are living in in those housing units. Have they said that they'd like to see electric charging stations for large housing developments of 20 units or more? And for sustainable workplaces, folks that are, putting bike racks in, they're LEED certified, or they're close to transit, or have other policies at their workplace that are sustainable practices. And then, as I mentioned before, above and beyond the match, here is the points that you'd be able to get in those various categories: 25 to 50, 2 points, and so on. And our timeline, we launched the program back in September. The first round of grant applications are going to be due November 30th. Then we anticipate a second round to be announced shortly thereafter, with applications due April 30th and awarded in June. We are working with building and general services, particularly with municipalities and schools that are looking for assistance. You can contact Dan Edson via email or phone. They've worked out a contract agreement with select vendors that can help walk municipalities and schools through the process, help them with siting, help them with questions around pricing or what equipment's going to be best for them. And then Drive Electric has been a great partner in this program, and they're available to help offer technical assistance as well to anyone applying. And they can, I know there's been questions around rate structure, and they certainly can help offer some guidance in terms of what are fair rates. Certainly we don't want to see price gouging, but I'd encourage you to reach out to them or give me a call, and I can talk through some of that with you as well. And then also important to work with your utility providers. Some of them may be offering some additional benefits that you might want to take advantage of. So reach out to one of these folks within your region and find out if they're offering any specials, or if they can offer you any additional assistance. And that's all I have as far as the formal presentation portion. I'm happy now to take some questions.
Gary, can you hear me? This is Sarah.
Yeah.
Hi, I got my sound working.
Great.
So thank you everyone for joining Gary for this awesome presentation. I have everyone muted just so it's not chaos of sound, but if you do have questions, please type them into the chat function. I believe we had a question early on that I want to read, and if you could answer.
Yep.
Whether or not the question is whether or not the state has any guidance on the service fee that any vendor should be allowed to charge if awarded a contract to own/operate a charging station on town property. The town wants to be sure that vendors aren't setting exorbitant prices for using the system. Is there a limit that the state is proposing to use, or a limit on the ROI a vendor is allowed to get?
So we haven't set any limits. This is going to be some of this is going to be learned as we go. I did have a clarifying question in terms of the service fee. You know, there are fees that are charged for use. That there might be a service fee for the user who's using it, plugging in and actually charging. So are you talking about that user fee, or are you talking about a user fee that would be for the host who has the particular EV charging station? So as far as the user fee for someone who's got an electric vehicle who's plugging in, and there's going to be a charge for that particular use, we are not setting levels, but we are requiring a fee schedule be submitted with the grant application so we know what they're intending to charge users. Hopefully that helps answer that question.
Great, thank you. We have another one. I would like to understand the payment options. Could we use the same company we use for collecting taxes, Municipay, and just have the customer agree to their fee?
So once again, it's going to be up to the owner of the equipment to determine how they want to charge the users. I've seen as simple as a donation box in Plainfield to credit card or a phone number or having a a fob that you would pay for that particular unit, like ChargePoint might have. So it's up to each owner to determine the best way that they want to structure that, and we're kind of deferring to Drive Electric for their expertise, or to, once again, Billing and General Services for municipalities and schools to help guide applicants in terms of the best way to collect money.
Great. And in response to the first question, Jeff said that he was talking about user fees for a person using the charging station. Right.
Right. So, Jeff, hopefully I answered that question, and feel free to give me a call, and we can talk more about that. I think there's going to be a lot of learnings in this first round, and I do want to kind of put that out there right now that please provide us feedback or if there's recommendations that anyone has out there. The EVSE work group can take those into consideration as we move forward with future rounds. So it's really helpful to kind of get that feedback early on here.
Great. All right, a few more questions. Do we need to get a quote from an installer ourselves, or does the state recommend installers?
You have to get. We recommend that you get a quote from a few different folks. Once again, if you're a municipality or school, that you can work through one of their preferred vendors that BGS has, and that contract I don't believe has been totally finalized yet, so I'm not sure exactly which providers they're dealing with yet, but you can contact Dan to get an idea if you're in that category. We are getting some information from Drive Electric in terms of there's vendors who are providing the equipment, and there's also installers. And what we're finding is folks are contacting Drive Electric to get on a list, and we're just referring to that list. So happy to kind of share that with folks. If you send me an email, or if you send Dave Roberts an email, he can send you the list of vendors and electric contractors that have been that are on that list.
Great. Another question is, does the charger need to be accessible to the larger public, or in case of a workplace, can it be limited to customers of said business?
Yeah, you can have, if you're saying it's publicly accessible, it does need to be publicly accessible. But if you have it can be limited to your place of business, certainly. So if you have a general store and you want to have access for people to park while they're at your store, that's very reasonable.
And is that something they would need to put in the application, make that clear?
Yeah, obviously the more information that we have, the better, so we understand what the intention of the unit, who the intended audience is for that unit.
Okay, great. If there are any more questions, please go ahead and type them into the chat function. And Gary, I'm assuming if this is okay with you, you can send me the slide deck, and we can make that available to people.
Sure. Yep.
Great. And also, as you guys can see, his contact information, phone, email, he's really easy to get a hold of. So, if you have any questions, it might just be easier to call, but you can get your hands on these slides. And
then I just encourage folks to be in communication with your town or with your energy committee if you have one. I don't know if there might be a mix of folks who are businesses or housing. Just it's always good to have communication around. Hey, we're thinking about applying to put units over here. Just to know what the town might be thinking as well. So we're trying to utilize this money the best we can. Within your town, I think the better that will be.
Great, and yeah, there was just a question that you basically answered, but we had a guest ask about can municipalities restrict having these, even if the state's encouraging it. But you just answered that question.
Yeah.
So.
And I think I mentioned too that you can put multi-site applications in, but if it's a private entity, for example, that has multiple housing units in different locations, they could put in for multiple locations in that particular case. But we wouldn't want to mix that with a municipality who's also applying for 2 or 3 locations and put that all together in one application. That would actually be treated as 2 separate applications. So we encourage you to kind of do what's appropriate.
Great. Well, I'm just going to switch over to my closing slides, but if there are any more questions, please go ahead and type them into those chat functions. And like Gary said at the beginning, this is part of a project here out of the Brattleboro Development Credit Corporation called the Southern Vermont Economy Project. And we will have not only the recording of this, so if there's something you missed and you want to watch it again, that will be available to you, but also the slide deck that Gary used, as well as his contact information. And it'll all be uploaded onto this website that you see on your screen, brattleborodevelopment.com/knowledge-bytes, and you'll be able to find everything there. And unless we have any other questions, I think we can sign off here. Yep, I think we're good to go.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, Gary. Really appreciate it.
Yep, thank you all.
Hopefully you'll be getting some phone calls here.
That sounds good. Feel free to give me a call with any question, folks. Thanks.
Thank you, Gary. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.